The Inspector General for the U.S. Capitol Police says officers were ill-prepared ahead of the January 6th Capitol riot. Michael Bolton told a virtual House panel the department needs major changes.
In regards to a cultural change, we see that the department needs to move away from the thought of process of a traditional police department and to move to the posture of a protective agency. A police department is geared to being reactive for the most part, whereas a protective agency is postured in their training and planning to be proactive, to prevent events such as January 6th.
This week, Bolton released an internal watchdog report about the events leading up to the attack. Those findings prompted Thursday's hearing. The 104-page document rebukes department leaders and says they overlooked key intelligence ahead of the riot. For more, CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins me now. Hi there, Catherine. So what else did we learn from Inspector General Bolton about the response of Capitol Police leading up to and then during the January 6th attack?
Well, Elaine, I think one of the most striking findings in the watchdog report is that there was this deep internal conflict about the intelligence and threat picture in the days leading up to the Capitol riots. On January 3rd, there was a threat report from the intelligence unit of the Capitol Police, that said Congress was the target, that they should not expect pro-Trump supporters to target counter-protests, but Congress itself was the target. And then on the day of the attack, there was another intelligence report that was absolutely in conflict that said the chances of violence, they were improbable. And on top of that, our investigative team and producer Michael Kaplan was able to obtain this document from the FBI that was sent out on the evening of January 5th. It's called the Norfolk Memo. And it has multiple threats that are very detailed, but I want to just draw your attention to the fact that it had a map of the Capitol and the access tunnels. So what we have here leading up to the 6th is this kind of internal disconnect at the Capitol Police. The officers simply don't have a good idea of the threat they may be facing. And then you have what I would call sort of that traditional pre-9/11 stovepiping problem. You have this important document from the FBI that never got to Capitol Police leadership, nor, based on my reporting, did it get to Pentagon leadership either. And they were the next important piece of the puzzle, which was the deployment of the Guard on the 6th.
So, Catherine, given how extensive these findings are, how are current officials reacting to this criticism, and what changes are we seeing implemented in response?
Well, the U.S. Capitol Police are welcoming the findings of the Inspector General, and I think it's an excellent question because I think it will be in two parts or bifurcated. The first part, I think, is the easiest part, which is more money to replace what was clearly antiquated equipment on the day of the riots that left many officers vulnerable and exposed, and then also the recruitment of more officers to the Capitol Police. The second part is the more difficult part, and that really is a culture change. The Inspector General, as we came into this segment, talked about moving into more of a protective service role. And what that means in layperson's terms is think about the kind of security you see at federal courts around the United States. You have an armed presence, and then you also have ongoing threat assessments as to what the security picture is. So these are groups that are much more forward-leaning and proactive, which is not what the Capitol Police have been until this point.
CBS News has also obtained an internal Department of Defense timeline memo outlining the events of January 6th. It details how Vice President Mike Pence pleaded with the Pentagon to assert control during the riot. What else does it show, Catherine, about the internal debate happening within the administration that day?
Well, it shows you really from about 1 p.m., just as the rioters breached the Capitol campus, they were not quite to the building, the calls came in, and that the principals at the Defense Department were watching this unfold in real time. And then there was this constant back and forth between the D.C. National Guard, the head of the Capitol Police, and then also Pentagon leadership. And they needed to have two things to fully deploy on that day. They had to have the authorization from the president, which they had in advance, but then they had to have that request. And then when they got that request, based on my reporting here at CBS News, there was a very fierce debate within the Pentagon as to what to do with the National Guard. The National Guard in Washington was manning traffic control and crowd control. They were not armed. They did not have riot gear. And that was at the request of D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser. So the question was, do we take the Guard and backfill the D.C. police who were armed and had riot gear and then send them up to the Capitol? Because that seemed to be one of the quickest fixes, if a fix was even possible that day. But it was the quickest force to move. So there was a lot of internal debate. I think the bottom line for folks at home is that really the fate was sealed prior to January 6th in the sense that there was not a call to fully mobilize the Guard by the Capitol Police, and then a very limited call from the D.C. mayor to have them as crowd control. And then when the crisis came in the moment, there was debate about how to deploy the Guard, and then it took real time to equip them and send them to the Capitol itself.
Well, Catherine, our regular viewers will know that you have been following this investigation since the very beginning. You've kept us up to date on the latest.
It's been my pleasure,
hundreds of
Elaine.
people have been arrested. Say that again?
I said it's been my pleasure, Elaine, to do it with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's generated so much interest, Catherine, because I think people are really wanting to understand the motivations and understand what it is that prompted some of their fellow citizens to engage in this kind of behavior. So we know that hundreds of people have been arrested and charged in connection to this event on January 6th. Where do a lot of those cases stand now?
Well, we're really at a crossroads now, Elaine, and I think the next few weeks will be so telling as to whether we have these very serious conspiracy cases that have been brought against a handful of groups, and the allegation is that they began planning weeks, if not months in advance, to come to the Capitol and foment violence, whether they take that additional step and become sedition cases. And it's not clear yet to me from my reporting whether that next step is ultimately going to happen, because as a federal prosecutor said to me, you have to really kind of get inside the mind of the individuals and what their intent was on that day. Was their intent to cause violence? Was the intent to shut down the Electoral College? Was their intent to do something even more? So that, I think, is the key thing to watch, whether it crosses that threshold to sedition, but that's not to minimize the very serious nature of the charges overall, and then also the assault on police officers, and then also these conspiracy cases, which allegedly began almost in some cases right after the November election.
Catherine Herridge. Catherine, as always, we are grateful for your reporting and analysis.
It's always
Thank
fun
you.
to be with you, Elaine. Thank you.